Welcome to Ask the FM Doctor, an interactive web series brought to you by the Simplard Foundation and IFMA to help you navigate the complex and ever-changing world of facility management. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a newcomer to the field, you'll find valuable insights and tips to deliver a better experience for your stakeholders while saving money. Join us on the third Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern U.S. time to learn from our FM docs while connecting with other facility managers from around the world. Register today at simplerfoundation.org/FM-doctor so you don't miss an upcoming session.
Hello, and welcome to today's Ask the FM Doctor. Today's topic is budgeting for facilities costs, high inflation, supply chain delays, and workforce shortages. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing I want to say here is that when I go through this and talk about this, please don't get down. I'm actually very optimistic for the future, but in order for us to get there, I think we have to go through a bit of a rough patch first. So the first thing I want to do here is kind of describe the current market in terms of workforce and different things we're seeing to help us give a broader context for what we're talking about. Now, we have various statistics here. This is from the AGC, which is the Associated General Contractors. The BLS is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and other sources as well. In November of 22, so just 2 months ago, there were 7.75 million employees who work in the built environment, right? The unemployment rate overall is 3.9%, which is extremely low. In July of 22 was slightly lower, 3.5%. But of course, that fluctuates over time. This is, again, construction-focused data here, but that has gone up and down over time based on the current market trends. Wage rates, those have gone up every single year since 2008. Obviously, during the Great Recession, there is different things that happen as a result of that, but in general, wages for construction have continued to go up over time. Now, when we think about job openings, this is kind of the main thing that a lot of folks are concerned about. And the reason why we're talking about construction-focused data initially, I know this is a facilities management discussion, but the reason why we focus on construction data is that many times the same people who provide the technical services or technical trades in construction are the same folks that would also be involved in facility management. I think also as a facilities professional or an executive, you often hire contractors to do services for you. And because of that reason, we need to be aware of what is also affecting their industry so we can all respond to it in our profession. So in terms of job openings, this is from October 2015 to October 22. It's very recent data. There was a dip in number of the job openings. So we saw that as a result of course, the COVID shutdowns and different things, but has continued to go back up here. So when the numbers are high, that means there's lots of people hiring for people in construction, right? There's lots of job openings. Now, what's interesting here is that in July of 2018, 1.9 job openings for every unemployed person, right? So what does that mean? Well, what it means here is that if I work or if I have an interest in construction, right, there are 2 jobs available for every open position. In other words, if you are working this workforce, you kind of have the pick of the litter here in terms of jobs and different opportunities that are available. What we're also seeing is that long-term employees who have been in an organization for a number of years kind of have all the cards in terms of pay, in terms of benefits and other things because they've been around so long and they are extremely valuable employees to the company. Now, when we think about what does the future look like, what are some of the biggest concerns driving concerns for our contractors, the AGC did a study in December of 22, so again, very recent data, and asked contractors, what are the biggest things that you're worried about? Here's the 6 things they talked about. The first thing is an economic slowdown, a recession. Now, if you look at the current markets, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that today here, but if you look at overall, there are a number of things that we're concerned about from an economic standpoint, right? Contractors are concerned about that too, that at some point a recession might be coming. Material cost, again, we've all seen that. Material costs have continued to go up. Workforce shortages, rising interest rates. The Fed just upped it again. There's talk that they might slow that down or even stop those altogether. But as of now, the last several Fed meetings have resulted in increased interest rates, at least here in the United States. Supply chain issues, and then finally, labor cost is rising overall. If you want to convince people to come work for you, one of the best ways to do that is to pay them more, right? So labor cost is certainly going up. The impact of these things and what contractors are reporting is obviously schedules are a major issue. If you are working as a facility manager, you've probably seen significant delays on many of your projects. In fact, I know of several recent projects where they wanted to go forward, they have a plan in place, and the costs are just much higher than what they actually budgeted for. So some folks are delaying projects, some folks are canceling projects altogether, and some are just paying the increased cost because it is what it is here, right? So contractors, they're seeing all sorts of different things. In general, they've seen that a lot of projects have been postponed or delayed, but not actually canceled. Now, we also in 2020, we asked facility managers, well, what's happening to your building footprint? The reason why this question is interesting because it's a measure of what the overall demand is for facility services. If we have less of a building footprint, this obviously means we have less of demand for facility managers. All right. So what this chart, what this chart here shows is we asked respondents, again, these are all FMs, what do you expect to happen to your building footprint in the future? And here's what we found. Half of the respondents, 47%, said that they have no change to their building footprint in the next 3 years, which is interesting because there's other data we looked at and we asked them, for example, the percentage of people that are now working remote. And what we found is about 3/4 of the people we talked to is that their organizations are having more people that are working remote. So I'm not exactly sure how to interpret this because you have some people that have a lot more remote work, which means less office space. And yet we have data like this that shows half of the FMs said that they're not going to have any changes to building footprint. In talking to some other folks about this, the overall idea is that, well, because we're locked into a lease, we can't actually change our footprint because we have a lease, we can. The second thing, and probably more prevalent thing, is a lot of folks are not really sure what's going to happen into the future. If you expect that the demand for provided services or provided space by an organization is going to increase in the future, even though it's not here today, getting space back that you let go is really difficult. And so a lot of folks are really uncomfortable letting go of that space and then having to release that space, except at a much higher rate. When you look at unemployment overall, again, this is just construction because again, it points to what's going to happen in facilities. Obviously, we had a major dip to COVID. That's what this is right here. This is 2020, and then it picked up right away. Now, if you compare this to 2010, 2011, this is the Great Recession where it really hit us here. What's interesting is that if you look at the distance from, let's say right there, let me kind of mark on the slide here. So if you were to measure the time it took to recover, let's say from right here to about right here, look at that time difference, right? So that's what, maybe 13, 15, that's about 6 or 7 years in terms of approximate recovery to get back to where things were right here. The reason why this is interesting is that the amount of time it took to go from that point to 2020 took about 7 years, right? Is a very, very long recovery. When you look at COVID and what happened with that, that was a very quick recovery. Look how fast things picked it back up. Now, obviously, it didn't fall as much as it did from the recession. However, the return time was extremely fast. The reason why this is, I kind of like to think of it as a freight train, right? If you have a big giant freight train going downhill, how do you stop that freight train, right? The answer is you don't, right? And the amount of demand for construction and broader built environment services at 2020 when all this happened was significant. So yes, there's a little shutdown, but all that pent up demand to get things done in terms of construction was still there. And that's why I recovered so quickly. Now let's look at some regional data. Again, this is just US focused, but I think it has broader implications and key takeaways that we can have when we look at this. This is the unemployment rate for the 25 largest metro areas, again, here in the United States. So for example, if you look at, let's say, Minneapolis, St. Paul, 1.7% unemployment, right? Miami, Fort Lauderdale, 2.3%, San Francisco, 2.6. Those are extremely low unemployment rates, right? Now, the reason why this is, you might think, well, this is great, everybody has a job, which there are certain benefits to that, right? People having work is a good thing. However, when the unemployment rate gets too low, what that means then is that we can't expand as a market. So when a contractor thinks about this, many times, many contractors want to continue to get bigger. And when your unemployment rates are this low, that means they can't get bigger. Why? There's literally not enough human beings in place that allow them to get bigger. They physically don't have enough people to do this. So two choices then, they either buy or merge with another company, or they don't grow, right? Those are the only two choices. These rates here, like 1.7, 2.3, these really low percentages here, all that is people transitioning from one company to the next. That's not really unemployment in the terms of I'm looking for a job and I can't find a job. That's not quite what this is. This is somebody quits one job, they have some time off, and then they go somewhere else. It's purely transitional. Now, when we look at the changes by sector, this is where it really starts to affect FM. This is from February 2020, which is when the shutdown happened, to June of last year, June of 22. You see here that there's major shifts in terms of where the employment is at. So leisure, hospitality, government, other services, significant declines in terms of overall number of people working there, and much more workforce being focused on business, professional services, trade, transportation, utilities. This is where the labor is going. So if you have traveled in the last couple of months, you've probably seen this as well, right? There's major workforce shortages in the leisure and hospitality sectors, and in government as well. We worked with a number of procurement people, and there are demand for people to work in these various types of government jobs, right, including procurement, right? So let's shift our focus here to a few minutes for the workforce challenges and what we're kind of doing about that and how we're responding to that. The AGC and Sage, another consultant, they again looked at some data about what might be happening in terms of 2023. Last time I'll say it here, folks, but the reason why we're focusing on construction data is because this is indicative of what facilities are also facing, right? Because again, it's similar types of workforce that we're also concerned about. So the first thing we looked at here is what percent change do you expect in your headcount in 2023? And 70% of the respondents said that they expect to increase the total number of people working for them, right? Which is interesting because if you look at last year, there was also demand for people, right? There's always demand for people. And they expect to also increase the number of people that were working in construction. One of the major takeaways, and as I tell my students here at the university, that now is a really good time to be working in construction and facilities management. The demand for people in this profession is extremely high. There's no reason why most people, once they graduate, from a university or any other type of program, why you shouldn't have a job in place, right? There's significant demand for this, and it's just a matter of finding a good fit. Next question we looked at is how would you describe your current situation in terms of filling salaried and hourly craft positions? 80% of people having a hard time. They can't find people. Again, we know that. Do you expect any changes in the availability of hourly craft or salary personnel for the next 12 months? Again, it's going to be continue hiring people in 2023. And then finally here is what changes did your firm make or pay in terms of benefits in 2022 to respond to these different challenges? 72% of the respondents said they increased base pay rates in 22 compared to 21, right? We talked about that. If you want to convince people to come work for you, pay them more money. Now, why is this relevant as a facility professional? It's because if your contractors are having to pay their laborers more, that price will get passed on to the owners, right? We as owners, as facility managers, as building owners, we will pay for all this. And that's a concern, right? We need to be aware of what's coming here. Now, when we think about, okay, we know from a workforce standpoint, well, what does the future look like in terms of additional demand for construction services? There's a couple different measures out there that we can look at to help us better understand this. The first one is called the Architecture Billings Index, the ABI. What this is a measure of how busy architects are, right? And so in November of last year, they had a score, there was a reported score of 46.6. So what this means here is that it's a measure of the number of billings compared to the previous month. So if I'm an architect and I have more billings this month compared to last month, that means I'm busier. So the reason why we look at this as a leading indicator is that if architects are busy, that means eventually those designs will be constructed and built out, right? That's why it's a leading indicator. So 46.6 in November, 47.7 October, so it had gone down slightly in October, And again, it's the second straight reading below 50 since January of 21. So this would suggest to a small degree here that maybe things are slowing down. If it's below 50, what that means is there's less billings compared to the previous month. If there's more than 50, that means there's more billings. So less than 50 means things might be slowing down a little bit. So this is December of last year. However, when you look at a different metric, this is the DMI, the Dodge Momentum Index. This rate, this value here, is a measure of the number of construction spending expected for the coming year. DMI is at its highest level in nearly 14 years. So this would suggest then that the demand for construction, which will affect facilities and everything, because we have to manage these facilities, right, is also going to continue increasing. Finally, we look at some data that Ken Simonson, he's an economist with the AGC, and he broke down the infrastructure bill. So here in the United States, there was a bill passed, I forget the date, I think it was about a year and a half ago, that provided $1.2 trillion for different types of spending, right? And they broke it down by different sectors. The most of the money, roads and bridges, $350 billion, transit, passenger, and water infrastructure. And there's a number of things here. Broadband internet, $45 billion for broadband internet, right? So the point of all this here is that there's going to be even more money, right? More money that's going to be spent in the built environment, right? This is non-residential construction spending by sector. So as an FM, if you're looking for a career change, perhaps, or if you're looking to look at where all the action's at from a facilities management standpoint, this chart is also useful for that. Manufacturing, water, commercial, huge demand, huge increases by those sectors as well. Where things are going down in terms of spending, lodging, public safety, religious, and power. Those, in terms of percentage of spend, are going down pretty dramatically here, right? So again, headwinds for what things might be coming down the line. And then just some commentary here about other things that might be coming as well. Decarbonization, energy policy. We've seen a lot of discussion on that. Onshoring. What onshoring means is that, for example, here in the U.S., certain computer chips are typically manufactured overseas, and there's political involvement to bring some of these things back to the United States. And other countries are also going through this as well. So that'll have an effect. We'll see how this plays out here, but again, this may also have an influence. So we looked at the economic status, we looked at the workforce demands and the future spend of construction, and we know that there's going to be more of that. I want to spend a few minutes just focusing specifically on the workforce, right? So this next couple slides, so we're going to go through and look at population data. Again, this is just US focused, but I think the takeaways are broadly across the board useful for us here. This looks at the total population from 2010 to 2019. And we're seeing this basically everywhere globally, right? So 2010 and 2019. Now I want you to take a moment here and look at the slide and see if you can pick up on what's going on here. So the white, that's 2010. So this is from 2010. The green is 2019. Do you see what's happening here? Is that there's a shift upward in this chart, right? It's going up. In other words, what this is telling us here is that the average age of the total population is increasing, right? And this has significant implications over time in terms of what we're going to do about the workforce challenges that we're seeing. So let's look at some additional data. This is a population histogram, men and women, from ages, newborns, babies, all the way up to 85 plus, 1960. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click through the next 20-year segments and watch how this thing changes here, okay? Here we go. 1960, 1980, 2000, 2020, and then a projection of 2040. There we go. Do you see what's happening here? Is that the shifts in workforce are continuing to increase in terms of age. The reason why this is important to us, especially as facility managers, is that as more folks continue to retire and knowing that the younger folks are coming in, they're not there, right? There's literally not enough people at the age levels that would be providing that experience needed to fill in or backfill our positions as folks retire, right? This is a major demographic shift we're seeing here, and we need to be aware of what's actually going on. There's some other data here as well. What this chart shows, again, this is from the BLS, what is the prime age male workforce participation? Now, why are we talking about this? Well, typically in the technical trades, so think of construction, for example, most of the people who actually provide that the hands-on work of doing that are men, right? And so when we look at that demographic and seeing how that changes here, this has implications. So in 1970, the average participation rate, people that could participate, could have a job and did have a job in this demographic, about 98% of them were participating. In 2021, that number had dropped down to 87%. So significant declines in terms of the number of people who are actually participating, men ages 25 to 54 who are participating in the workforce. So what does this mean here? It means that there are going to be shifts in terms of the types of people, the types of demographics, women, for example, that are going to be working in our field, right? In construction, in facilities management, those are the types of shifts that we're seeing here. Some other challenges here. Baby boomers, again, globally created significant wealth in terms of what they have here, right? Well, what's going to happen to a lot of that wealth? It's going to be transferred to their children. In fact, it's estimated by 2030, $70 trillion are going to be transferred from parents to their children. Why is this relevant? What this means here is that if I am, let's say, mid 50s, not quite at retirement age yet, and my parents pass away and they transition or they have that wealth transfer, inheritance, the motivation for people in that age group to continue working, especially if the inheritance is large, is minimal, right? And if you think about historically, the types of people that have a lot of expertise and insights is frankly older people, right, in that age range. So you're going to see people that are going to leave the workforce early because they have large inheritances that they're going to come across, right? Again, not everybody, of course, but these are some major things that we expect to see happen or in fact, are already happening. In fact, I talked with a project manager the other day, and what he said, so his dad passed away. He got a large inheritance. He's still working. And he said, I'm one bad meeting away from retiring, right? Kind of interesting. The second thing here is that there's more men ages 25 to 34 that live with their parents than a spouse. First time since 1880. 2.4 million women left the workforce since February 2020. Drugs are a big problem. In fact, the reason why this is such a concern here is that when you have people that can't work due to drug use, that's a huge loss of people that could actually work, right? So as we look at minimizing the impact of drugs on the workplace, this is one area that has a significant positive impact that if this were avoided, we all of a sudden have a more people that can work in our field. Again, demographics only getting worse forward. That's unfortunately the reality of it. It's a challenge today, but it's not going to be fixed in the next 3 to 5 years. This is a 10 to 20-year problem that most up and coming facility executives are likely going to face for the entirety of their career, right? So we need to be aware of what's actually going on here. The last piece I want to talk about today is the price changes, right? We've seen price impacts from a facility standpoint, and this is good for as you plan on your budgets for the future, we need to be aware of this, right? So this is the cumulative bid prices versus material cost, right? So since 2016, prices for everything have kind of gone up. There's the PPI or the Producer Price Index for inputs to construction. So what this means here is that we look at how do we build things? And primarily it's based on the raw materials, right? So wood, gypsum for drywall, other raw materials. If you look at what those cost changes are, that will percolate down in terms of how much it costs to build projects, and therefore us as a facility manager, how we're going to see impacts on our budgets when we try to, let's say, do a retrofit, right? This is why this is relevant to us. So again, prices across the board are going up here. You can break that down by further. So diesel fuel, the reason why we're interested in diesel fuel, because if it costs us more for diesel, then that means that it's going to cost more to transport, which means the cost of having those products in place is also going to go up, right? Again, December 22, prices kind of all over the place, although this is gypsum and plywood. So if you all remember, last year, May of 21, we're with like sheet goods, went crazy high. That's what this is. They've come down, it went back up, and now things appearing to be coming back down a bit, right? So looking at the individual price of products is a good way to help us predict and understand what's coming down the line. So as a facility manager, if you kind of know the major materials that are going to be involved with your upcoming project, this is a good way to understand, well, what might the cost impacts be on my project that's 6 months from now. This last one here, and I think this is especially important for an FM to be aware of what's happening to the contractors. So what this chart represents is the difference between the input PPI, the cost of raw goods to build projects, and the bid price PPI. So what does this mean? Well, ideally, when a contractor bids a job, you want the cost of their goods and services to be matched to the bid price that they give you. If the inputs is more expensive than their bid, that means the contractors are losing money. And vice versa, the bid prices are higher than inputs, then obviously they are doing better, right? They charged one price, it costs them this much, and so they can pocket that differential, right? So from April 2020 to April 22, this data is a little bit old, it's about 5 months old. Look at the spread here. So red is the inputs, black is the bid price. So what happened is that the cost for raw materials went up significantly. However, the bid prices didn't match that. So this differential here between what the contractor is paying for raw materials and what their bid prices were is significant. This means that contractors are losing a ton of money. So what happens then? Well, as you look in the slides here, is that the contractors started adjusting their bid prices. Prices go up. And also we see here that we started making some recovery. The inputs to PPI started going down, or at least flattening out. However, December of last year, it went back up. Look at this here, skyrocketed up again. The bid prices did not keep up with that. And so anytime these two numbers aren't the same, means that contractors are losing money. So as an owner, we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to be aware that the financial pressures our suppliers are facing. Now, some good news, let's look to October. We can see here that they are just about coming back together. So this is 2 months ago, bid price, that's yellow, that's right. So that's the bid price PPI. Here is the inputs PPI, and those have just about come together. Now that's good from a contractor standpoint, but what this means though, as a buyer of these services, that you have seen your prices go up. And it's only going to continue, not just due to materials, but also due to labor force, workforce concerns that we're seeing. It's just a really difficult time to be in this, right? So we need to be aware of what's going on. I have some data here. This is delivery of different materials. So HVAC equipment, in the past, historically, we've seen about a 6-week lead time on that. Now we're upwards to 14, 18 weeks. Steel has basically almost tripled, right? 18 to 54 weeks. Roofing, anybody have roofing they bought recently? 13 weeks up to 36 weeks. I mean, just huge delays in a lot of these different areas here, right? So I think the main takeaways to be aware of this as an FM is that there's cost challenges, there are delay challenges here, and we have to be cognizant of what's actually going on. If you want a lot more detail, I encourage you to reach out to Ken Simonson. Again, he is an economist with the AGC, contractors. He has a contractor's focus, but there's a number of resources that if you really want to understand what's going on, it's beneficial to look into this and understand what's actually happening in the workforce here. So in summary, main takeaways. The first thing is that costs are going to continue increasing. We know that's going to happen. What you need to do then is start having the conversations now and make sure that to set the expectation that prices are going to continue going up. It's just the way it is. So if you have projects that can perhaps be delayed until maybe this whole thing acquiesces, that might be an option. The other option, which is, it is what it is here, that we have to pay more for the services that we need to get done. This is the reality of the situation, right? The second thing here is I would encourage you to think about being a fair owner, right? I've talked with a number of contractors, and many of them said that if we can place orders for material sooner than we normally would on projects, that can actually help the owner save money and get equipment on time. I know certain projects, these are government projects where they don't sign anything, they don't order anything until the whole contract negotiates and everything is worked out with that. And there is certainly a reason to do that. You want to make sure all your ducks in a row from a contractual standpoint before placing goods. However, that can be months of lost time that you can start ordering these major equipment items ahead of time. So being aware of the challenge that our contractors and vendors are facing is really important. The third thing I would suggest here is to pay on time. Your contractors, cash flow is the key to being successful. The more we can pay on time, the more we have flexible contracting approaches, like I kind of mentioned, is certainly beneficial. And frankly, ask your contractors about it. Ask for their recommendations as to best way to deal with this. And if they give an answer that you don't understand, keep asking questions. Ask them, where else have you done this before and how did it impact the projects, right? Don't just accept it as face value, but really try to understand what the recommendation is. And this last one here might be a really hard pill to swallow, but I think it's really important. Is hire experts, which means not using low bid. If you are hiring your contractors on the basis of low bid, that in my view totally minimizes their ability to think ahead, or I should say their incentive to think ahead, because, well, price is the only thing that matters. I'm not saying that price is not important. It's extremely important. But I think that when we think about a total life cycle cost perspective as a facility manager, there's more to it than just the lowest price. Again, folks, thank you so much for being here today. I hope this was valuable. Be sure to check out the website. A huge thank you to IFMA for sponsoring Ask the FM Doctor. And with that said, you all take care. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's session of Ask the FM Doctor. Be sure to mark your calendars now and join our next webinar at 12 p.m. Central Time on the third Tuesday of the month. We look forward to seeing you again.